So we are officially at 6 p.m. and I am excited to get started with our very fabulous panel this evening. To start, I just want to introduce myself very quickly. My name is Molly Knipe. I'm the CEO of the YWCA. The YWCA is very happy to be putting on this session this evening. We are the comprehensive domestic violence and sexual assault provider for Arundel County. Our mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. And we feel that one of the best ways to do that is to affect legislative change. So it is rather fitting that this is the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote. It is also the 100th anniversary of the YWCA of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. So it was a very eventful year. So we're very happy to have folks here. And we just can't think of a more fitting way to be engaged this year. This particular panel is really born out of our racial justice work at the YWCA and our emphasis on lifting voices of the historically underrepresented groups. So tonight you'll hear a little bit about various views and process and how we kind of demystify voting, etc. But we also want to make sure that we're pushing for greater voter registration. This is a nonpartisan event, and we want to really emphasize our goal in just getting people out to vote. We want to make sure that regardless of your political party, that those who are elected really represent the wishes of the greater population. A couple other things that you'll see, the YW nationally has a really great program called Why Women Vote. You can see more information about that on our YWC page or on the YW national page. It's great regarding tools and resources and really demystifies, you're going to hear that word a lot probably this evening, demystifies some of the process. And then finally, we'll go over some of our ideas around next steps, voter registration efforts. I think it's September 22nd, yes, is National Voter Registration Day. So you'll see us out there doing some things around that. And then also you'll see a lot on social media from us about that. And we certainly hope that you'll tap into that. Feel free to like, share. The goal is to get more folks out there, of course. And then finally, before we get started, one of the things that we're really excited about is to do a follow-up to this webinar, and that is about navigating the legislative process, advocacy, how do you get your bill introduced, how do you talk with your legislators. I think you'll find tonight that they're not nearly as, it's not as intimidating as you might think, and in fact, they would love for you to call and share your ideas because they're just here to represent you. So with that, we are going to do some introductions of our very distinguished panel this evening. To start, I feel very fortunate because I actually know all these people pretty well and they've been great to the YW. So as nerve-wracking as these kind of panels can be, they make it much easier. So I am thrilled to have this particular panel here this evening. First, we have Delegate Sandy Bartlett from District 32. Sandy Bartlett joined the Maryland legislature following our last election and is the Deputy Majority Whip and serves on the Judiciary Committee, Joint Committee on Cybersecurity, and Legislative Black Caucus, among multiple other committees, work groups, and caucuses. You notice I'm just going to throw like multiple in a number of these folks' descriptions because otherwise we're going to spend the next 25 minutes going through all the marvelous things that they're doing. Sandy is an attorney and a professor who resides in Maryland City. Next, we have Senator Pam Beidle, District 32. Pam began serving in the Maryland State Senate in January of 19. She is a member of the Finance Committee and Vice Chair of the Executive Nominations Committee. Prior to her election to the Senate, Pam served as state delegate for 12 years and on the Anne Arundel County Council for 8 years while managing a successful insurance agency. So she hasn't been doing much for a while here. Prior to being elected to office, Pam served on numerous community and nonprofit boards, and she credits leadership Anne Arundel for encouraging her to be involved in elected office. I've heard that many times. That's great news for leadership Anne Arundel. And sometime we'll have to tell that story because that's a good one. That definitely changed the future. And then Senator Sarah Elfreth, District 30. Elected in 2018 to represent Annapolis and Southern Anne Arundel County, Senator Sarah Elfreth is the youngest woman ever elected to the Maryland Senate. She serves on the Budget and Taxation Committee as the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Critical Area. That's a mouthful there. Among multiple other committees and commissions. Outside of the Senate, Sarah teaches political science and public policy at Towson University's Honors College and lives in downtown Annapolis. And last, but certainly not least, Shaneka Henson, delegate from District 30A. Shaneka joined the House of Delegates in 2019 after serving on the Annapolis City Council. Shaneka serves on the Appropriations Committee, Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland, and Women Legislators of Maryland. Shaneka is an attorney who lives in Annapolis. I'm also, of course, going to give our own plug here that she was also at the YWCA, where we had the distinct pleasure of her being a staff attorney with us, representing domestic violence survivors in protective order hearings, and that was toward the start of her career. So thank you to each of you for being a friend and a guide, and also just really important in advancing the mission and the work of the YWCA. Okay, so with that, we are going to get started. So this was a very interesting statistic that I think that we've heard a number of times, and yet it's always a little bit overwhelming to me, that in 2016, 43% of eligible voters, nearly 100 million people, didn't cast a ballot in the presidential election. As we start the discussion, let's explore questions specifically about voting in the upcoming election. So just for folks who are attending and observing all the great work that folks are doing here, the way that we're structured this evening is most of these questions will be directed to a single individual. However, we certainly welcome anybody who would like to share their views and perspective as well, and we certainly have time to do that as well. So with that, Senator Beidle, we are starting with you. What can I tell my friend or family member who says their vote doesn't count and won't vote?
Molly, first, thank you and the YWCA for hosting this tonight, because we really need to work educating our voters, and I think tonight is an important step. So you gave an interesting statistic that 43% of the people voted in the last election, but that means, 43% didn't vote. So 60% of the people made your decision for you. It should be more, it should be 100%. And I hope everyone really cares about voting and really looks to see what elected officials or what candidates are going to serve what they need. I will tell you, in my neighboring district, one year someone lost by 8 votes, and another year someone won by 6 votes. So it really is important. Every vote does count. And an interesting story is in the Virginia House of Delegates in the last election, it was a tie. In one district, there was a tie. And they made that decision about who should represent that district by basically flipping a coin. Not only that, but it changed the body of the House of Delegates, because that one person made a difference and swung the whole party and the Speaker of the House to that one person. So in that case, one vote would have made a difference. So your vote does count. Not only do you need to vote, but I hope you'll take your time to do the background. It's so easy today to go on everyone's website, check their priorities, see if they line up with yours, and really do your homework, because the decisions we make really affect our voters. And we appreciate the fact that the voters elect us. And yes, we do want to meet with our voters and hear from them and learn what's important. So your vote does count to us, and your opinion counts. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to say on that one?
Molly, if I could jump in, and again, thank you for having us and having this important discussion. And Senator Beidle laid out some of the close races we've seen in recent past, and in Baltimore County, County Executive Oshefsky won by 17 votes in a primary. In Montgomery County, that county executive won by less than 100 votes. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of votes that are cast. And so one vote really does make a difference. And we're doing our utmost in the General Assembly to make it as convenient as possible to vote. And there's never been so many options to vote. we're going to talk a little bit later about this upcoming election and how to vote and opportunities to vote. But, you know, folks can vote by mail by requesting their ballot online, requesting it over the mail. They can drop it back in the mail. They can drop it in a drop box. They can vote early. They can vote on election day. And, you know, short of us declaring, or Congress rather, declaring election day a national holiday, we are really trying to make it as convenient for folks to vote according to their schedule or according to their needs. So we really do hope folks exercise that right.
Thank you. Okay, our next question starts with Delegate Henson. How do we get more young people, especially young people of color, voting?
Thanks, Molly, and thank you for hosting this panel and for having this very important discussion at this critical time in our country. And your question was really important because you said young people and particularly people of color. The intersection between the two has never been more apparent. We understand that Gen Z not only are lots of things different about their lives, but lots of things are different about them in terms of composition. They are a most diverse generation that we've ever had. They have more Latinos in Gen Z than we've had before. We have more people of different ethnic backgrounds. We have more immigrants that are embraced in Gen Z. So when we look at the youth vote and how we get youth to be interested in voting and to lock into understanding the power of the vote, we understand that there is a direct intersection between youth voting and people of all diverse backgrounds finding value and finding a voice in the ballot. We know that they also have something else in common. We know that this next generation of voters is faced with an economic future where they are not finding the same certainty that some generations did prior to them. The Pew study did a research study, and they asked voters, or they asked people, what they were faced with during the COVID-19 challenge. And more than half of Gen Zers said that someone that they know that was their age or them themselves had lost a job due to COVID-19. And those numbers were much greater than they were for the millennials, much greater than they were for Gen X. So we know that what's on the ballot this November is not just people, but it is also futures. It is also people who will be making the decisions on what's going to happen with resources in our countries and how we're going to stabilize our future. So we can get young people interested in voting by them understanding the intersection between what it is that they're experiencing and the solutions to the problems that they're facing, particularly trying to figure out what the future is going to be for them economically.
Are many of you getting questions from people, or what are you seeing with regard to that generation and their feeling or their impetus for actually voting? What are you seeing as their perspective on this? Do you see them wanting to get out to the polls more and seeing and being engaged? Do they seem like my voice doesn't have the same impact? Because I'm seeing a lot of people out in the community and really rallying around change. And it is a lot of the young people. So I'm curious what you're all seeing.
I can lead off on that. I see our panelists shaking their heads. I'll say that I see both. I see young people who are disillusioned, young people who have seen people vote before and seen that be one of the top solutions that we offer, and then not seeing change at the pace that they want to see change happen. And so some of them are not finding that as their number one tool in the toolkit to bring about the progress that they need to be able to have a life that they'd like to have. But then I've also seen young people who have been incredible in organizing and rallying their friends and families and people to get out and vote, who have been educating themselves, who have been getting out there and letting people know what's at stake in this election. So I think that I can say I've seen passion on both sides of that.
Can I also add, I think for the young people that are really involved, they care about healthcare, they care about cost of college, they care about the environment. You know, I spent the day on an environmental issue with the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and young people really do care about our environment more so than I think my generation. And so I do think a lot more are coming out to vote because they really care about the issues that affect them.
It's been interesting too, because, a lot of the rallies, I see a lot of very young people, right at the head of the line and with the microphone. And it's great to hear them out with talking about how they really want to see change and they want to affect change. And so that's really, to me, encouraging, certainly. Okay, so some people say that the reason people are not engaged in elections is because they don't really understand what their representatives do on their behalf. And it's kind of funny because Delegate Bartlett and I have had a few conversations about this. So I'm actually very interested to hear this answer, and I'm hoping others will talk a little bit about their experience as well. What does a day in your life look like as a representative of the community?
Well, there's two types of days. Well, there's several types of days, but there's two time periods that I want to focus on. Thanks for that question, Molly. And I'm happy to have this opportunity to share what we actually do. Because I think that people think that we work 90 days out of the year, and then after that, we're eating bonbons and sitting on an island, a deserted island somewhere. But that is far from the truth. We are currently in session runs from January until April. Excuse me. And we are currently in what is called the interim, meaning that we're not in a voting session. I like to call it a non-voting session because the concerns don't go away. Our constituents still need us. Our constituents still want us to represent them. We have various committees that we have been appointed to, and we are serving on those committees. We have workshops, and we're serving on those, or task force. So the work doesn't stop in any way. So let's just say a typical day in a non-voting session, which we're in now, is usually averages about 12 hours a day. Whereas a voting session between January to April, it's an indefinite period. It can start as early as 7:30. You can have meetings as early as 7:30 or earlier. Some people, if they're walkers or exercisers first thing in the morning, some use that as an opportunity to have a meeting. There's a lot of thought that goes into all that you do. And so if you have a bill or that you're interested in, you want to make sure you're pulling in all the stakeholders. So that's the reason for all these various meetings. You may even belong to various caucuses. So you have caucus meetings first thing in the morning. I belong to 4, and I think everyone on this panel belong to numerous caucuses, at least probably 4 as well. And then we start our session. And session usually is, in the morning around 10 o'clock, but we can also have a session whenever leadership calls the need for a session. A voting session where we go to the floor. And the bell literally rings for us to go to the floor. And it's really kind of interesting because you may be in the middle of a meeting, but that bell rings and you have to get up and go. And that's quite all right. It's kind of fun actually, because then you know that you can you definitely have a reason to end that meeting. But after you go to the floor, you'll have meetings with various advocates or various interest groups or stakeholders or constituents, and you'll have bill hearings in that afternoon. Those bill hearings are where we get into the indefinite period, because we can have an indefinite number of witnesses. And the beauty of our General Assembly is everyone gets heard. So if you sign up to be a witness within the parameters that are required and you follow the instructions, you will be heard. Now, if it is a topic where there are numerous witnesses, they may limit the time period on how long you can be heard, but you will be heard. You can also submit written testimony. And so we read that as well. Then the evening, there may be receptions or more meetings, and when you finally get home, you get to read a lot, because you've got to read about everything that you worked on that day, and you've got to prepare for the next day or so. And if you're a chair or a co-chair or a vice or of any sort, then you've got to prepare for your meetings as well. So it is a full day, every day, 365 days of the week. When we're in our voting session from January to April, it can be a 5-day week, meaning that on the weekends, you usually need to recoup. You should recoup. I try to use that time to recoup. I've been advised by folks who've been there and have endured and have the stamina, Senator Beidle, but I have been advised that you want to take some time to recoup. So sometimes on the weekends, we're not able to attend community meetings to the same level that we can during the interim. So the point I want to make, Molly, is that it's busy regardless whether or not you see us in Annapolis or you don't. We're still very much engaged and very much involved, and always we try to make ourselves available.
Thank you.
I'd like to, number one, thank Delegate Bartlett for doing such a good job of describing our day. But I have to tell you, when Delegate Bartlett first thought that she might like to run for office, I was a delegate at the time, and I had her spend the day with me, and I almost scared her away. She really had second thoughts about, how busy the day was. And I think, Delegate Bartlett, you've lived up to that expectation. It is a busy day, but we love it.
Well, thank you. I do love it. And it's funny because, Senator Beidle is absolutely right, because there were meetings, when I'm talking meetings, there are meetings while you're walking to your next meeting. So you're having a moving meeting sometimes because you want to, there are revisions or there are issues or whatever. But the point is to stay informed. And the way to stay informed is you've got to, build relationships, and you've got to have the conversations with the stakeholders.
Can I ask you to describe something? So you used the word caucus. Can you explain what a caucus is, please?
Oh, sure. So it is a group of individuals who have a general purpose. So for instance, some of the caucuses that I belong to is a Legislative Black Caucus. So we tend to focus on issues that affect the African-American community. There will be issues, there will be bills, and we will not narrow our focus and target on those particular issues. There's also a women's caucus where we focus on issues that directly affect women. So if there are bills, each caucus tends to have a legislative review committee or subcommittee. And within that subcommittee, there may be bills, given last year's bills that were introduced, I don't know, I think we were in the 3,000 range. Within that, there are specific bills that the Women's Caucus was particularly interested in, or the Legislative Black Caucus was particularly interested in, the Latino Caucus or the Asian Pacific American Caucus. So what you do is you get together, you have these meetings, you talk about what you're most concerned about, and then you can support those bills that support your issue. Write a letter of concern, or write a letter of support, or perhaps there's testimony, and perhaps you want to let advocates know that these bills are being heard, and you want to drum up as much support for those particular bills that affect the interests of that particular caucus.
So let me ask something else, because you talked about the difference between interim and kind of regular session, all of which is, to me, kind of session in its own way. But can you talk just for a moment, because as you know, one of the things that I've been pretty clear about is there are a lot of people who think generally January to April is when I should come talk to you because that's session. True or false?
100% false. And the reason for that is because when I was giving the schedule for January through April, if you notice, I didn't say we were spending a lot of time in our offices. I don't even see my staff a lot January through April because I'm everywhere else but sitting down in my office. And so to wait till January or any time from January to April to hold a meeting with us, one is it's much harder to get a meeting, and two, our attentions are directed in so many other areas, but the bill process has already started. Bills are in now, or going in now or November, I forget what the date is, but the point is that around November, they have to be pre-filed. Let me take that back. They don't have to be pre-filed, but they can be pre-filed. And so there are deadlines along the way. If those deadlines are not met, then you're not guaranteed a hearing. If there is no hearing, then there's no testimony, and you don't get a chance to present your side or advocate for your particular issues. So the time to talk with your representative is always, don't get me wrong, always. But if you have a particular bill or a particular interest on a particular subject that you want to get heard during session, then now is the better time. When we're in this interim session or this non-voting session, this is the time to speak with us, to let folks know, this is the bill that I really want you to support. And there may have been a bill that was already in a previous session that didn't pass. It's okay to write to your representatives and say, that bill that didn't get passed, I really want that bill, I really want you to support that this go round, or you supported it last time, I want you to support it again. All those conversations are the types of conversation that we're having now, and they're proper to be had right now instead of waiting until January.
Perfect, thank you. And that's a really great segue actually to my next question, which is directed to Senator Elfreth, which is, how does the work you do impact my everyday life? So really, what is the connection between the public services that, I or others may rely on and the decisions that you're making?
Well, thank you, Molly. That is, I've been thinking about this, and that is so many places I can go. It's such a broad question, because I feel like, and I think my colleagues share this little frustration that so much focus is on the national and federal politics, when all the action is at the state and local level. And the decisions that really impact folks' everyday lives is being decided on an everyday basis by state and local. And so, whether it's, funding for roads, funding for schools, whether it's policies that help set the rates of our health insurance or rates of our electricity bill, that's all determined by the work that we do. And not only that, not just the actions at the state and local, but we just get more done. And that's not to throw shade at Congress, but we're able to be efficient and effective in our 90 days. Delegate Bartlett said that we see upwards of 2,500 to 3,000 pieces of legislation in those 90 days, and we're able to get quite a bit out. Around anywhere from 600 to 800 bills will pass in those 90 days. And what I'm most proud of our work at the state level is so much of it is about cooperation. It's about coalition building. It's about policies and budget items that reflect really the diversity that is Maryland. And so much of our work and the bills we pass are not only bipartisan, but there's a tremendous amount that are voted out unanimously. Not your more controversial stuff, but for the most part, we really do work together and as a team, as a House or as a Senate, to see that we're really creating a policy that works for Marylanders, and not even just policy. I wanted to give an example of something that we were able to get done, and it was kind of an informal women's caucus kind of situation. And you mentioned I teach public policy, and I just taught about the fact that when you get to 20% or more, any body, whether it's a corporate board or an organization or a legislative body, when you get to 20% or more of that body made up of women, you start to get a critical mass of women, and we are able to start changing the conversation from a policy standpoint, but also kind of the temperature of how we work together. And so I've seen it in my short 2 years of the policy issues that we've been able to tackle, because we have a record number of women in the House and Senate. And we're addressing things left and right that have been brought to the table for years and decades, and things that our colleagues have been working on, but we're seeing that we're able to work to get these things done a little quicker. And I wanted to tell one quick story about the power of our offices that didn't even require a piece of legislation. It was just a question of working together. And it had to do with a story came out in the Baltimore Sun in my first year in probably February of 2019 about 3 counties in Maryland Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, and Harford County, where our police departments were having victims of sexual assault and rape sign waivers. Sometimes when that victim was at a still in the hospital, sometimes when they're still under the influence of alcohol, sign waivers saying they did not want to pursue an investigation against their accuser. So we knew that this, sorry, I have a couple of dog chaos behind me, but we knew right away when we read this article that this policy cannot stand. And I worked with some female colleagues in Baltimore County and Harford County, and we immediately picked up the phones and called our county executives and said, this is not okay. Because we don't control necessarily what goes on in a county police department, but we can pick up the phone and make a call to the people who do and say, under no other crime, bank robbery, hit and run, do we have victims signing away their rights to an investigation. And it really has to do with, a clearance rate and a little bit of like, they're there, little missy, you don't really want to investigate the situation. Long story short, within the hour, our county executive had called our police chief, abolished the policy. And then in Baltimore County, it took him a little longer. It took him like 24 hours, but I'll give him credit for doing it quickly. But that's one of those that we didn't have to write legislation. We didn't have to write a line item in the budget. We were able to work together and work our networks. And just by virtue of having this critical mass of women and more women in positions of power, we're able to create policy change that might not affect people's everyday lives, but certainly do affect some of our constituents' everyday lives in a really positive way. So there you go.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to add?
Oh, sure, I'll jump in. There are, like Senator Elfreth said, innumerable ways that the work that's done impacts people's everyday life. One of the ways that Senator Elfreth and I teamed up this past session was on a bill to require inspections of public housing in the city of Annapolis. When you look there, there are 790 families that live in Annapolis's public housing, and their houses were not being inspected. And what that means is that there wasn't a real quality control measure to make sure that people weren't living in substandard conditions. And what we were getting were families that were coming to us saying that there was mold, families that were saying that they had all types of just housing defects where kids were getting sick, just terrible conditions, Molly. And so we put our heads together and we're like, we have to do every single thing we can to help people who live there. And so it was a simple piece of legislation that Sandy got to vote on too, because it came through the Anne Arundel County delegation. And when we had the hearing there, and I'll tell you, there's not always consensus in the House with the Anne Arundel County delegation. We had some residents who came and testified and shared their experience of how the conditions had impacted their health, about how they had been trying their hardest, working their hardest every single day, but how what they got at the end of 40 hours a week was still what it took to live in public housing. And so what they said was, I deserve a safe and decent place to live too. And what they got was a consensus, a unanimous vote out of the House delegation, and then it sailed through both chambers as well. And so that piece of legislation impacted their everyday lives because it meant that if there were poor conditions, somebody was going to see and somebody was going to do something, because they wouldn't just be suffering in silence. There would be that measure of oversight with an inspection. So I know that we were incredibly proud of that work that we were doing, and we knew that we could have at least 790 families who were going to be able to have somebody that, had their back because we were able to come together.
I think, you make a really good point there too, Delegate, about the importance of testimony. And I'm just gonna, since you brought it up, I think to me, when I've been on the sort of legislative floor and listening to folks, those who have the voices of people, the testimony, the lived experience of people, I think that is so compelling to folks. And again, for people who are, participating in this webinar today and watching, I think it's just a really powerful statement to say, when groups of people to come together or individuals come together and say, testify, it really makes a huge difference on those who are determining the policy, saying, I didn't realize how this impacts somebody in a very real way. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it encourages people coming out and providing testimony. And I've seen it on everything from environment to, sexual assault. So, just people really talking about what it means to them. So thank you for those answers. The next question is actually for everybody to answer, and we'll start with you, Delegate Bartlett. How can we encourage more underrepresented voices to run for elected office? And actually, I think everybody on here feels pretty strongly about really getting underrepresented folks into politics, whether that is individuals of color or women, et cetera. So I am very excited to hear your answers. And it's a two-part question. So how do we get others involved? But what inspired you to run for office? So Delegate Bartlett, we'll start with you, please.
Sure. Well, what inspired me is the way that I was going to say to get other folks involved. One is I went to Senator Beidle, and I told her I was not going to run. Some people had encouraged me to run, and I said I wasn't going to run. And what I didn't say was because I was afraid. But courage is doing what you're afraid to do, and just do it afraid. So I did that. But she said to me, well, that's too bad, because you would have made a good delegate. And she mentioned some qualities that she saw in me that I didn't see in myself. So the way that I would say, if you want to get involved, if you want to run for office, first of all, talk to folks who are already doing the job that you want to do. Because more likely than not, there are aspects to the job that you don't know about, that you may find that you absolutely love and that you can do. And don't necessarily look to the people who have been doing it forever and they make it look easy, and you think, oh my gosh, I could never know as much as they know, I could never do as much as they do. It comes, and it hasn't, I haven't been in this position for a super long time, but I have been working in the community for a long time, and that's what translates. That community work translates to the jobs that we do. So the steps that you want to take are get involved in the community. And this can be from HOA to PTA to, your church, your place of faith. It doesn't matter. That involvement, that level of leadership, that level of seeing a problem and offering a solution, that's what's needed to run for office. So put your fear aside, do it anyway, and just find the courage and find a mentor.
Great, thank you. I do like your phrase, do what you're afraid to do, just do it afraid. That's actually really good advice. Thank you.
Well, with that said, Molly.
Oh, see, she just muted herself on purpose so that we didn't know the rest of the story.
Hey, that's a good strategy. I need to get the floor in my committee meetings. With that said, though, I have to give credit where credit is due. That is actually from Joyce Meyer. She just wrote a book called Do It Afraid. And so I will give credit to that, to her. I did not come up with that completely on my own.
Well, now you just helped her book sales too, so that's good. Thank you. Senator Beidle, same question.
Thank you. I agree. I really agree with Sandy on the importance of being involved in your community. I think you learn a lot of leadership skills and collaboration skills by being on boards and nonprofits. And the year that I ran for office, the way I convinced my husband that we could do this was that I was on 9 boards. And I said to him, it won't take any more time than the 9 boards I'm already serving on. Of course, we found out that really wasn't true. But the way I really got involved, I had no interest at all in politics. Unlike some folks that have been involved in politics or been lobbying, or I absolutely had nothing to do with politics. But as I referred to earlier, I participated in leadership at Arundel, and my class really pushed me. I don't know what they saw. I don't know what qualities or skills, but they really encouraged me to run for office and helped me. They helped me campaign. The first time really is scary, isn't it, Sandy? Yeah, it really is. The very first time is hard work, and you know, when you've never been involved in anyone else's campaign, you really have to learn as you go. But there are a lot of people to help you, and I had a lot of help, and I have tried to pay that forward. I've helped other women run, and we made a huge difference in the county last year. We went from no women on the county council to 5, and our delegation, we got more women, and there are 2 women in the Senate delegation. For the first time in our county's history, we have 2 women, and I love having Sarah with me in the delegation. We get a lot done, don't we, Sarah? It really is helpful to have a friend. So I think what Sandy said about, you know, do it, run scared, or do it, what was it you said? Do it scared.
Do it afraid.
Do it afraid. So I really think you just, if it's something you want to do, you just have to get involved and make your decision and do your homework. I met with a lot of people before I ran the first time, and just, if it's something you want to do, make it your goal and do it.
Thank you. Senator Elfreth, same question. How do we encourage more underrepresented voices to run for office, and why did you run for office?
Well, I want to start by thanking Pam, because she was one of the first checks that I received when I decided to make this huge jump to run for the state senate when I was 28 years old. It was, when I look back at the risk, it was insane, but thankfully it all panned out. So what I wanted to run because I think what Delegate Bartlett said, which is this job is really about solving problems on behalf of your community. And if you can do that, and if you can contribute, that's kind of your obligation in one way or another, whether it's on your community board or whether that's on a nonprofit, whatever you can do. What got me thinking about it was when I was a senior in college, and I had worked on some advocacy issues on behalf of students and voting and things like that. But I went to a lecture by Madeline Kunin, who was the first female governor of Vermont. And she has written a couple of books about women in representation and the difference that we make when we get to that critical mass on policy issues, temperaments, all these things. And at the time, I think it was like 18% was the best that Congress had ever seen in terms of female representation, and state legislatures were struggling to reach 30%. And she said, very simply, if you're passionate and you're capable, it's your obligation as a woman to run for office. And I was 21 when I heard that, and it just blew me away. I knew I'd always want to be involved, but I didn't know this was what I could do. And certainly having people who looked like me in positions of power is helpful. And I think that's something that all 4 of us can do and try to serve as good examples every single day. But the basic fact is our government and our society is stronger when the people making decisions look like the people we're serving. And that's just true in any example. And I hate saying this, but it's on my mind a lot. I teach this, and we've come so far in the last 2,500 years of ensuring that, you know, we're getting to a place of greater justice and equity and greater representation. And there's still a lot more to go for us to reach parity when it comes to gender, for us to make sure that our representative bodies are as Black and brown as the communities they serve as well, to make sure that everybody truly feels represented. Because at the end of the day, that's our job, is to make people feel represented and to solve the problems of our communities. And so paying it forward, as Senator Beidle said, that's what we're here to do. We didn't get here on our own. I had a tremendous amount of help. And it's my obligation to pay that back and provide opportunities for more young people, more young women, more young people of color, to make sure that they have the doors open to them that I'm so grateful that people opened for me.
Thank you. And Shaneka, before you answer, I just want to tell you that when you were running or getting ready to get into politics in general, at the YW, we literally said that does not surprise us in the slightest. So you talk about people who have passion, and you see it early on before we ever heard you say a word about politics. Doesn't surprise us in the slightest, but I'm very interested to hear, your answer to this question.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate that. Yes, I appreciate that for the Y being a place that helped me nurture that passion for advocating for people and for wanting to help empower people. That's one of the reasons why I was drawn to be an attorney. When I had to really reflect on how I came to public service, I thought about it, and it started probably when I was 9 years old. When I was 9, I had a summer camp director who was this like really tall guy. And when you're a kid, like, you know, every adult looks big, but this was like a really tall guy with this really deep voice. And he had just this like presence. And so he was really nice to us, really kind. I respected him a lot. And then as an adult, I got to vote for him. He became my alderman in the city of Annapolis. And so over time, after he was my alderman, I didn't, love his representation of me so much anymore. And I remember thinking I could do that job. But it was because I identified with him that I felt like I could do that job. He was a person who I was familiar with. He was a person who I had a connection with. He was a person who more or less, looked like me. And so I thought I could do that. But when it came to being delegate, there has never been a delegate for District 30A who looks like me. So I didn't set my sights on that position. I didn't originally think that was something that was in the cards for me. So I didn't take my journey into politics with this neat path that I had carved out for myself. I kind of went where I thought I could do the most good for the most people. And I got to where I got to just trying to keep that model of doing the most good for the most people. And I have always made that the core of my decision making. And when the opportunity came to be able to do that on a state level, I had to do a gut check and say, can I do that here? I can. Okay, that's what I'll do. But I think representation matters because you want people who have something to contribute to feel like it is a space and a place for them in politics. So I'm so thankful when people who had not seen that necessarily be a path for them, when they're excited and when they see themselves having a place in politics and they can kind of see how that's a career path for them, how that's something that they can contribute to the world. So I'm thankful that I get an opportunity to expand people's thought process and their horizons on what politics looks like and what they can contribute to the political landscape.
Thank you. I'm only laughing because we're very fortunate, but that kind of path is a very slippery slope. And I think Senator Beidle would probably say the same about what was sort of your plan, but then you had a calling. And I think that's a really special thing that, when people have this very genuine calling to serving, to service. And it's interesting to see what people kind of think their path is. And then it's like, well, but this is where I'm needed. And I think it's really amazing. So, but I do stand by my comment that that's a slippery slope you're on there. But I'm glad that you guys have all, really taken to that calling and moved forward. So thank you. This one is a tough question, and I think it's really one that we need to touch on, and that is, and this is starting with Senator Elfreth. How do you feel we have left specific groups of people out of the conversation, and how do we actively and with intentionality change this? You got one of the hardest questions. I'm going to admit that.
Well, thank you, Molly. I appreciate that. I'll start with what Delegate Henson touched on, which is, some very real housing discrimination policy that was alive and well in Maryland's law when we got to the General Assembly. And this is something, I think, Delegate, it was written in the 50s and 60s about this housing discrimination that held the standards of safety and health of public housing to a much lower standard than we hold private housing. And we've had conversations about how that's just, it's de facto racism in our law. It's tantamount to redlining. And we had an obligation to stand up and say, we're the ones who represent this community now. We didn't write this law, but it's our obligation to dismantle it. And so finding those places in law that were written back at a time when the General Assembly does not look like it does today. We're all so proud to serve in the most diverse General Assembly in the history of Maryland. And we have an obligation to find those spaces and dismantle that systemic racism, that systemic sexism that is inherent, because this place wasn't built for us in mind. I mean, we get to work in one of the most beautiful buildings and historic spaces in the country. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington worked out of the buildings we get to work out of it, but they were not built for people who look like us. And so we have an obligation to go in and make sure that our laws reflect what's best for our communities. But so much of your question, when I hear it, I think about access, and I think about, even the ability to say that we have a representative General Assembly, we still need to provide meaningful access to everybody in our community to help us make the best decisions. So some things we do as a team to ensure greater access with our community, we're certainly out and about. Pre-COVID, you will find Delegate Henson, Delegate Jones, and I, every single day of the week in our community, listening and trying to solve those problems. But even when we host town halls, pre-session and post-legislative session, we knew that a lot of, even our young parents, for instance, aren't able to physically come on a Tuesday night to a town hall. So we decided to invest in childcare at that town hall. So if folks with young children need to come, we can provide that opportunity. One very small positive out of this horrible pandemic we're seeing is this increase in the use of technology to provide access to people's policymakers. And so how are we best utilizing these virtual town hall spaces, virtual meetings, people who wouldn't be able to take off in the middle of the day to come and testify in Annapolis can now reach us in a different way, and make sure that their voice is equally as heard as anybody who can take the day off and testify or lobby or anything like that. So making sure that we're providing access is incredibly important for us to make the decisions that really benefit all Marylanders.
I see you out a lot too, with a lot of the delegation, quite frankly, with the food distribution, et cetera. Do you feel like that's also giving you a really good and unique opportunity here directly from your constituents about what is a need that maybe you wouldn't have heard, on the phone or via email? I mean, is that a really different experience, I assume?
Absolutely. And all four of us are active in trying to help and literally rolling up our sleeves and lifting heavy groceries and talking to families about how this pandemic is hitting them and the disparities that it's only widened in our economy, in our communities, and hearing directly from people, we need to fix it. And thank you for asking that, Molly, because I actually emailed you after one of those food distribution events that I had spoken with a constituent who told me how a Spanish-speaking member of our community unfortunately experienced violence, and when they called the police department, there was nobody available to translate and make sure that she was safe and had her issues addressed, and all these systems that we built don't work for everybody in our community. And so my first thought was to call you, call the mayor to see how we can solve this problem. But I wouldn't have heard that if it wasn't, we weren't at a food distribution on a rainy Saturday morning where she felt comfortable enough, thank goodness, to come and talk to me about that issue. But yeah, we are hearing some of the real problems in our system that we are obligated to fix. Thank you.
I really felt that based on just the amount that everybody's out at this point and helping, I think that if there's a good side of that is it has really, I think, lifted a lot of voices that maybe people who would not be comfortable calling or visiting or trying to affect change in that way. And I think that's been a pretty remarkable difference.
Can I chime in on that one?
Of course.
I think that was an excellent question. How have specific groups been left out and how can we change that? I was on a meeting with Delegate Jones and Senator Elfreth, and my son, he changed high schools in Arundel County. And I held up a picture of his yearbook at Annapolis High School and the amount of Black and brown faces on the yearbook page. And what I noticed was each of the yearbooks was the same amount of pages. And so the number of pictures that were on the page, their pictures were very small because there were a lot of pictures on the page. And then I held up the yearbook of the school that he's at now, and their pictures were much larger because there were far fewer pictures because the school is half of the amount of students. But my son was one of only 2 Black students that were on both of those pages. And I said, how are these schools 15 miles apart, but there's such huge differences? And then the quality of his education. These are both public schools, But when I talked to him about his classroom experience, about the amount of time that his teachers have to prepare lessons, about the follow-up and response he gets when he asks a question, about even his track team and the way that his coaches can spend time helping him develop as a student athlete versus his experience when he was at the high school in our district. And it was a very intentional drawing of lines that gave one quality of experience to kids in one part of our county and one experience to kids in a different part of our county. So when we look at generations who have had these challenges, generation after generation, your question was, how do we change it? And your question was, how has this happened? And I think we see the writings on the wall. And that's why education has been such a focus of the Speaker of the House. It was a focus of Mike Bush. It's been a focus of Speaker Jones. And it's something that we're committed to tackling because we understand that if we don't fix our education system, that the next generation is going to be destined to repeat those same challenges. If we can figure out a way to make a balanced and fair education experience for kids who are just separated by 15 miles, then we're going to continue to draw those lines of division and have those same challenges.
I hear legislation coming down the pike this session from you on this, I'm assuming, right? Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And on the blueprint, it was already coming down the pipeline before I was there, but we've been working on the blueprint for Maryland's future. Some people call it the Kerwin Commission because Britt Kerwin and the work that they've been doing for years to rewrite the funding formula for Maryland schools. So there's a lot of excellent parts of that legislation that will make sure that we're giving more opportunities to kids that are in high poverty schools or kids that are coming from areas where they have a few more needs and a few more challenges. So we'll make sure that there are resources there to meet those challenges. But we are going to have to ask some tough questions about what we're doing with our schools if we want to make sure that everyone has a chance and has a future.
100% agree. Thank you. This next question starts with Delegate Bartlett. How has the current climate, specifically the call for racial justice, changed the calls and requests from your constituents?
Well, interesting enough, I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and we have a great deal. Part of our task is to work with civil law issues and criminal law issues. We also work on matters that affect the judiciary and public safety. So with that, the calls at first, when the Black Lives Matters movement got into full force after the killing of George Floyd, some of the calls that I got or some of the emails that I got were stating that, one, I don't know that they knew my background as far as that I'm an African-American woman, that I'm an attorney, and that I serve on judiciary. I think there were some blanket, emails that went out, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But I had the opportunity, it gave me the opportunity to write back to them and let them know that there are bills, there's legislation that I have supported or put forward to help with issues of racial justice. And it gave me an opportunity, because a lot of times you have an advocacy group, and they will disseminate based on your zip code who your representatives are. And so you write to your representative, maybe not knowing anything about them, but you have a particular issue. It gives me an opportunity to write back to them and to inform them on where I stand on the issue, and also anything coming up, any hearings that are coming up on that particular issue. With that said, because we're not in a non-voting session, I am serving on a community group currently where we're working on helping to eradicate inequities in the portrayal of African Americans in the media. And Delegate Henson is also on that group as well. And what we are doing is having meetings with individuals in the meeting, in the media, at the top level, the decision makers, so that we can get their response to how to improve matters of racial equity. So that's going on now. That's going on right now. And some of those are recorded, some of them are not. Some of them will be disseminated to the public, some of them will not. But the point is that having those meetings and letting people know as a representative for others in District 32 and in Anne Arundel County, I have an opportunity to sit on that committee and to speak one-on-one with executives of media. We're talking print media, we're talking radio and television, and let them know that people are seeing a depiction that is not accurate, and folks are calling for accurate depiction and fair depiction and equality when it comes to racial issues. Now, with respect to justice, well, you know, Speaker Jones has called for a work group that is meeting, in fact, met today, on police accountability and just understanding what our laws are currently and what our laws could be to provide better racial justice. There are going to be recommendations that are going to come out of that work group. We've got delegates and senators who are working now and meeting with individuals now and asking the question, how do we bring racial justice? How do we bring parity? How do we make sure that we end racial profiling? How do we make sure that there's economic justice? So all of these issues are being are being discussed so that we can come together and figure out solutions. And also, one more thing, I'm hearing a lot of people who are asking for specific requests, such as an independent review board or of police decisions, or some exceptions to the Public Information Act where there has been a death or some type of serious bodily injury, a repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights that is a protective device, which is in some ways we must protect those who serve and protect us, but we also must have accountability for individuals who do not protect and serve. And so those are some of the calls that I get, some of the emails that I get. My preferred method of communication is email, mostly because it's less likely to fall through the cracks. But that's basically how my calls have changed. And like I said, I use it as an opportunity to inform. And I'll tell you honestly, once you call my office, I try my best to make sure I bring you in to the fold as much as possible. And if there's a hearing on that matter, I'm going to let you know when that hearing is, or if there's a bill already on that matter, I'm going to try to inform you on that, because I want people to be informed. I don't want it to be merely a rumor mill of what people, and I also don't want the media to be the only educator, because I feel that that's part of our job as well.
Agreed. And I have to say, of all of your offices, I think you've all done a really nice job of, your teams notifying people when bills are going to be on the floor, and, this is when you'd want to come. And so I think that the communication has been excellent. I also think that this is a really good segue to the next question for Delegate Henson, which is, with understanding really everything that Delegate Bartlett's saying, how has this or will this likely change your approach to the work? So whether that be, a more open dialogue with constituents, or elevating priorities, or looking at new ways of expanding community reach to bring those priorities back to the House and Senate. So what do you think may change in all of this?
One thing that's changed is it's really energized people. It's a lot of people are interested in ways that I don't know that they were leaning in before. We've always had a core group of people, particularly in District 30A. I don't know if it's because we're seated in the state's capital that we have such a good, just solid group of constituents that have been engaged, but we have really added to that. There are so many people who are calling, who are writing, who are emailing, who are showing up to rallies, who are doing a lot to really let their voices be heard. So I think now one of the ways that things will change is I'm anticipating that that support will continue to stay there and then build as well. And anything that's going to get accomplished is going to need a critical mass of people who will support it and get it over the goal line. Nothing that happens that's changed happens in a vacuum or alone. You can have the best idea, you can have the best laid plans, but if you can't build support for it, then it's going to be next to impossible to get it done. So I'm hoping that everybody's renewed sense of togetherness will carry some things over the goal line in the days to come. So that's probably the number one way that I think that things will change post, the social justice movement. I think that another way that I'm seeing change is people's ideas of what's possible. I think that we kind of had some limitations in our own thinking of what we could do and some barriers that people had kind of put in place, but I see some of those barriers being breached. People are now asking questions. Delegate Bartlett just mentioned the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights and the conversations that her constituents are having about repealing it. That's something that we never could have conceived a few months ago. Delegate Bartlett, being on judiciary, can probably tell us better than anyone on the line about the conversations they were having and probably being nowhere near the conversations that they're having now. So I think we've taken a huge leap forward in terms of progress and where we're hoping to get. So I think that we're going to see some things that will come out of the legislative sessions here, legislative sessions from city, county levels, federal levels, that will hopefully be some of the change that people are coming out in numbers and saying that they're hoping to see.
Thank you. I feel like that was all very positive on good forward momentum. But I'm also going to ask this tough question of Senator Beidle, that sort of what is the challenge too. So it's obviously a particularly trying time in many, many ways. My guess is that there's been a lot of reflection on your first priorities for this coming session and obviously even before, the session starts. What is currently keeping you up at night?
Literally everything. I really am not sleeping well. And I think, there's tremendous amount of stress, not just COVID, but I'm very concerned about our budget and how it's going to affect our education. One of my number one priorities for all the time I've been in office has been how important education is for our children. And it's going to be really, really difficult. We worked really hard last year to get the Kerwin Commission, the Blueprint for Education. There's concern about whether or not it can be funded this year. The governor vetoed it. We'd like to override the veto, but concerns about whether we can fund everything that was in that bill. I'm really concerned about the issues with the racial inequity and how we handle the whole Black Lives Matter, the issues that are going to come to us. It's really made me very aware about law enforcement and how we need to really change how law enforcement is reacting. I've become much more aware to racial profiling and, the issues that I thought I understood what it's like to be a minority, what it's like to be Black and brown. I know now I didn't have a clue. I really didn't. And it's raised a lot of awareness and a lot of concern. The health disparities we're seeing, they've existed for a long time. We see even more now with COVID, and we can see by the number of people that are dying. We can see the racial disparity in that. So, any bills that I have that are pending are minor compared to the big issues that we're going to address. A new committee that I was appointed to this year is the Oversight Committee for Nursing Homes and Assisted Living. Huge issues in nursing homes and assisted living. Number one, trying to provide them with protective equipment and the testing for both the residents and the employees, issues with understaffing, retention of certified nursing assistants. And it's all about money. When it comes down to it, it's really about money. So I think it's going to be a really stressful year for us because of the budget. And now that I've dampened everybody's positive comments, I'm sorry, but the budget is really going to drive things this year. And Senator Elfreth, I'm going to say this to you. I'm really glad you're the one on budget and tax.
Finally, I got that.
So thank you for the question, Molly.
Molly, I join Senator Beidle's inability to sleep at night, and I think all of us do, because it's particularly interesting and trying time to be a representative or in a legislature, because so much of what's happening in response to this pandemic is really at the executive level and executive decisions, and we're in the middle of communicating that to our constituents, communicating our constituents' concerns up to the executives, and trying to solve these problems in this space. And another problem or challenge that is heavy on my mind is us coming back together as a nation after this election, and being willing to all come to the table and solve these problems. And it's something that we pride ourselves in doing at the State House, and we need to continue to do as communities, because we have, honest to God, some of the greatest challenges we're ever going to face in the coming years, be it budget, be it education, health, all of these things. And it's never been so important that we come together. And yet, we're having this kind of negative energy at the national level that only seems to be tearing us apart. So I had a meeting this morning, and they talked about our next meeting being in mid-November. And I was like, oh my God, there's scheduling things after Election Day. But I hope that, with people coming out and advocating and casting their ballot and making sure other people vote, we're going to come out the other side of this more positively, and hopefully more positively with budget, if we get a Congress that is willing to understand the pressures on state and local right now. It's going to make our jobs easier in the next session if we have a House and a U.S. Senate that understands the challenges that the state and local governments have really taken on, and help us with those.
Agreed. I didn't know if anybody else wanted to say anything on this. I'm assuming kind of echoing the same.
Yes, sleep is a luxury, and the pandemic has really been an awful situation. And one thing that concerns me is the digital divide. I was looking at a data dashboard today, a presentation, and it actually showed where there is, this person was a tech person, so they knew exactly how many gigabytes one needs to be able to hold, to be on a call such as this. And so he had a color for that, and where the gaps were in the state of Maryland. And then just to raise it up to one more level, to be able to, have a full interface and to be, there was more that needed, and he went up to that level, to that color. And then he went to the third level where you had ample, bandwidth to be able to do whatever you needed to do. So one of the questions was, well, what does this do to our students who are in those areas, those spots where the color was, I think he was using, green or something, where it was green? What happens to those students? So that's what I'm very concerned about. I love the idea of having distance learning. I love that idea because I think that there are situations where students are either ill or they are on some type of disciplinary action where they can't come to school. So I hope that our school systems will continue to provide even after COVID, and when things are in a better state and we're back to going to face-to-face learning. I hope that schools will understand that just because a student isn't in school, that the learning doesn't stop or shouldn't stop. So that was one of those things that Delegate Henson, when she was saying about, what could happen, that was something that I was saying could happen prior to COVID. But it was, it was not as widely received because it was something that hadn't happened before, until now we have the emergency, and we know that we can put our students, we can still teach our students even if they're not in the classroom. So So that keeps me up at night now, and then that's also part of my wish list.
Connectivity is definitely an interesting issue because whether it's, rural Anne Arundel County is an issue, Eastern Shore is an issue, areas of Baltimore are an issue just because of infrastructure. So it's really clearly an issue in a lot of different places and problematic. So thank you for your answers on that. So as we come toward the end of the session, we wanted to talk a little bit about how to engage. So, you hear the YW say a lot, your vote is your voice. It's on a lot of materials for us, and it's all over the place. And I think it's a very accurate description of how important voting is. It's critically important to ensuring health, safety, and empowered future for you, for your family, for your community. Plus, it's important to know how to use your voice to engage with your local elected officials and representatives. So to that end, people have asked what they can do to help with the YW's efforts. We're very focused on the voter engagement piece. You can be an ally in our efforts surrounding voter registration. So we'll have additional information on our website about social media, phone banking. This is all on AnnapolisYWCA.org. We ask again and again and again, please make sure you register to vote, but not just register to vote, vote. So information on the ways to vote and links are also on our website. Please make sure you register by October 13th. Earlier is better. National Registration Day is next week, September 22nd. And we recommend mailing in your ballot if you're doing that by October 20th. And again, Election Day is November 3rd. And then finally, we're going to have some follow-up information. We look forward to hopefully getting this group together again, but the YW being front and center on demystifying the process. So another Zoom regarding the legislative process. How do you navigate the system? How do you get information out there? How do you testify? Really, it's the first time that the YW was involved in that. Admittedly, it was very daunting. By about the 20th time you do it, you know all the people who are there, and your representatives are sitting right next to you, and they're your biggest ally, and people know who you are when you're coming. And the other thing I want to make sure that I speak on just before we get into our final question to our panelists is Mike Bush's name came up on the call, and everybody on this call thinks very, very highly of him and remembers him very fondly, and has certainly had a very significant impact in all of our lives. So I just really want to pay tribute to him and be very clear that his legacy is far, far from forgotten, and it's a living legacy because he's been instrumental in so many ways, and people on this call who are on this call because of him. So I just really want to make sure that I'm always very vocal and appreciative of Mike's contributions, which were many, many, many and wide-ranging. So with that, I do want to say thank you to our panelists and to everybody who joined us on this call. Finally, we want to provide an open opportunity for each of our panelists to share what questions you're hearing from, constituents or upcoming events you may be hosting. The one thing I'm going to ask that somebody answer as part of these closing remarks is, how do you find your legislator? So while you're all lovely, that doesn't mean that you are the legislator for everybody who's listening on this call. So if somebody wouldn't mind just touching on how you would find your particular legislator and connect with them. So we're going to start with Delegate Bartlett.
Well, there are actually several ways you can find us. One, I'll tell you, people underestimate the power of Google. You can always just Google, who are my representatives. You can also go to mdelect.net. So that's mdelect, ELECT.net. You can also go to the General Assembly webpage. And just there's a pull down for find my representative. And there's also a pull down for all the members of the House, all the members of the Senate. So there are several ways that you can do it. And some have Wikipedia pages. So there's all kinds of ways. Don't be afraid to just Google. Like I said, sometimes just Google and you'll get what you want. But mdelect.net, you can put in your address and you can specifically find out. I think you had another question, Molly, that you wanted us to address, and I forgot that.
What you're hearing from constituents, if
Yes.
there's any real themes that you wanted to just touch on that you thought might be beneficial to others, and also this is your opportunity of any events or trainings that you may have coming up to share those.
Okay, thank you, Molly.
Yep.
As far as what I'm hearing, it's running the gamut. We were really having quite a time with respect to unemployment issues. And I think that was keeping all of us up at night because the stories were horrific. And we were getting people who needed medical, their pharmaceutical care. They couldn't get it because they didn't receive unemployment. But that has gotten much better. It had slowed down. There are still some follow-up on that. But that was the theme that I was hearing for quite some time. As far as upcoming events, I don't have anything personally, but I do serve on the Attorney General COVID-19 Access to Justice Commission. And if you go to the Attorney General's webpage and put in Access to Justice, you will also see every event, every town hall that is listed. There has been a town hall on housing where we had over 2,000 viewers on YouTube. There is going to be a town hall on that's upcoming on September 23rd on consumer protection, and then there's another after that, and so forth. So I won't go through the full schedule, but I encourage people because it's extremely informative, and I love the fact that we are utilizing YouTube even for this, where if you don't make it that particular night to see it live, you can always look at it later. So thank you, Molly. Thank you to the Y, and I appreciate being here today. This has been fun. This has been good, and it's been a great opportunity to speak to some folks who may not get a chance. I may not get a chance to share on a regular basis with some of the constituents or just some folks who live in Maryland. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Beidle. Oh, you're muted. We all say we're going to get those t-shirts that say you're muted.
Yeah. But if we don't mute, it gets too much background noise. So we try to do that. But Molly, thank you again for having this tonight. And I'm just echo Delegate Bartlett's words that it's been, I think, a really good evening. What am I hearing? I'm hearing lots of questions about voting. And I think Delegate Bartlett forgot that next Wednesday night, the 23rd at 6 o'clock, Team 32 is going to have a webinar on all the different ways we can vote. We've got the folks from the election board, the director of our county election boards, Joe Torrey, to talk with about how your polling place has changed, how can you vote by mail, how can you vote early, what you should do with your ballot. If you're not comfortable mailing it back, you can drop the ballot. But I'm still hearing from people that I want to vote in person. Well, that's great. You can vote in person from October 22nd to October 26th to November 2nd in early voting in I think 7 locations around the county, or you can wait till election day, but be prepared because we won't have as many polls open as we have prior years because we don't have the enough judges that want to work in this pandemic environment. So, but plan your vote. That's what I would say. Plan your vote. We do have on my Senator Pam Beidle Facebook page, the webinar we did on evictions is still there to read if you need help with evictions. If you're not able to visit our town hall next Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, it'll be recorded and it'll also be on the Senator Pam Beidle page. So we're trying to do a lot to reach out to people to answer questions that we're hearing consistently and really doing our best since we can't be at community meetings now, which we typically would be doing out at community meetings. We're doing our best to reach out to people and make ourselves accessible. As my staff tells me, my chief of staff says, you meet with everybody. Well, that's how we learn. That's how we get to know the issues. And that's how we know why people feel strongly about their issues. So we really do try to meet with everybody that needs us. There are enough hours in the day, but I think this was a really important session. So thank you, Molly.
Thank you. Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Molly, and thanks for having this conversation. We're the four of us are used to seeing each other often, and not so much anymore. So it's been so good to catch up with folks. Because invitation is the most sincere form of flattery, District 30A team is having a election town hall the week after the good Team 32. So thank you, Senator Beidle and Delegate Bartlett. So ours is on September 30th. At 7 p.m. We're going to broadcast it from the Facebook pages of the whole team, and we have Board of Elections as well as ACLU to talk about making sure that this is a safe, fair, and free and secure election. Yeah, I'm hearing the positive thing about the election is I had so many constituents reach out in August worried about how they were going to vote, and I've never seen people excited to vote in November in August. And so that's the good news. The bad news is because we've kind of called a lot of audibles and the governor's made some decisions, it's a bit confusing in terms of all the dates and the things that people need to do. I think the most important thing to remember is what we got in the mail, and it's around here somewhere, but is not your ballot itself. Unlike the primary, we were all mailed an application that we have to return if we want to receive that mail-in ballot, and we have to return that. It has to be received by October 20th, which is causing some confusion. So as soon as folks get that, I would encourage that they return it immediately, or you can do so online. But as Senator Beidle said, making a plan to vote is almost as important as voting, because inevitably something happens on election day. It's raining, or you don't have childcare, or you have a deadline at work. So making a plan to vote and executing that plan, visualizing what time of day, if you're going to go early, what polling place, all that. And if folks are worried about their vote being counted, make a plan. If you're going to vote by mail, I encourage you to do that. If you're going to vote in person, stick with that. If you request your mail-in ballot and then change your mind and decide to vote in person, you can do that, but your vote will be counted as provisional until the board knows that you have not tried to vote twice. And so I would really make a plan today in September and stick with it moving forward. But if people have any questions whatsoever about voting, we are here to answer that question, or ideas for us about the upcoming legislative session. I think you can tell that we all very much love what we do, as tired as we are, but we are here to work for the people of Anne Arundel County. And so thank you so much, Molly, for having us on tonight to talk a little bit about that work.
Thank you, Senator. And Delegate Henson.
Yes, thank you, Molly, for hosting this event and for having a passion for empowering people. The WISE mission is eliminating racism and empowering women. And tonight you've got good information out there on the record so that people can take it and be empowered. So thank you for bringing us here and lending your platform for our voices to be able to help you do just that. When I look at what's ahead for me on Saturday, I'm going to be joining 1,000 men in Annapolis as they're having a 1,000 man march. It's led by the United Black Clergy in coordination with the Caucus of African American Leaders and several other groups. They are bringing men together to say, what can we do to bring about social justice and change? And it's really, I want to lend my support to them because I understand that Black men identified with George Floyd when he was there underneath of Officer Shaven's knee. They identified with Michael Brown when he was there on the ground in Ferguson. They identified with Black men across the country who have been victims of police brutality, violence, and even lost their lives. And so when they said that they wanted 1,000 Black men and men of all different races, nationalities, orientations to come together, I said, whatever I can do to lend my support to show up and be there to let them know that their concerns, their fears are important to not just them, but to people who care and stand with them. I said I certainly would be there with them. So this Saturday, I'll be at Navy Stadium at 10 a.m. to march with them down to City Dock. So that's next for me in terms of events. In terms of what I'm hearing from people, it's probably two questions that I get the most, if I can phrase them kind of package. One is, am I going to have a place to live? And the other is, am I going to have enough food to eat? And so one of the things that I try to prioritize is messaging food giveaways that are happening in the district and throughout the state, and then also informing people on the changing landscape of the eviction prevention policy. There's a number of different resources in terms of helping with rental assistance, But then there's also the changing landscape of moratorium that happened. So we have our state level one, which is not a true moratorium. It's more like a defense where you can go to court and say, I'm not able to pay my rent because I had a substantial loss of income due to COVID-19, but you have to go to court and your landlord is still able to file the eviction. So it's important to know, some people think, oh, they can't file an eviction. They still can, and you still have to go to court and assert that right and still prove that you don't have the money to pay and that that's due to COVID-19. But then more recently, the CDC and DHS came together and said that evicting people during a pandemic is a health crisis, that we've asked people to stay at home and stay put so that we're all safe. And so having that disruption of having people and all of their things scattered to and fro is not in the best safety and public health interest of everyone. So they issued a moratorium from the federal level. But there are several steps and qualifications. It's not applicable to everyone. And in order to access it, you have to fill out a declaration where you sign on a line saying that all those different eligibility criteria is something that applies to you. So you have to take that step to be able to do it and present that to your landlord. So there's still some action that has to be taken to make sure that you do secure that place to live. So I always try to make sure I get information to people so that those two most fundamental questions of, am I going to have a place to live and am I going to have enough food to eat, are two things that they don't have to worry about. So that's what I'm getting most from my constituents.
Thank you, Delegate. Well, thank you again to each of the panelists for this evening and your ongoing support of the YWCA and the state of Maryland, frankly. Thank you to those who joined our session this evening. We hope this was beneficial and look forward to seeing you on a future session. To submit questions or obtain details on how to register and vote or view this session, please visit our website at annapolisywca.org. And finally, please be sure to vote. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Good night.